part 2 of our discussions on Joseph W. Musser's writings on polygamy, also known as celestial marriage. Next on Polygamy, What Love Is This? Joseph White Musser was a Mormon who was raised during the years that the LDS Church was excommunicating polygamists, and Musser himself was excommunicated for his polygamy. It was during those first excommunications that polygamists, Musser and others, formed the Mormon fundamentalist movements that we see today. Musser himself was a polygamist and had, 21 children, and he wrote several articles and pamphlets and opinions justifying and defending Mormon plural marriage. We're discussing a book he wrote entitled Celestial or Plural Marriage, the Mormon Marriage System, copyrighted in 1944. Now, we have been discussing 4 chapters in which he talks about the ethics of polygamy. This time, we present his arguments to the questions, is plural marriage immoral? And his answer, of course, is, according to Joseph W. Musser, polygamy is not immoral. And according to all the polygamists, it's not immoral, not just him. Musser assert that polygamy and the sexual activity in a Mormon polygamy marriage is under divine direction. No one has ever produced a single passage from the Bible as evidence that's true. Now, Abraham, Jacob, and David are not evidence of divine approval, but evidence of divine disapproval resulting in negative consequences. Musser uses secular society as an example for his argument that monogamy is immoral. But secular society is only proof that God is not worshipped by the secular majority. Musser uses the argument that all Mormonism embraces the eternity of human kingdoms. Now, this is one reason why polygamy is so important to them, is they're human kingdoms. We quote,
"What are the fruits of marriage? The natural and major fruit is children. Why raise children? Not only because it is the natural and healthful thing to do, but because God has commanded it. Children are essentials of one's kingdom. Men are born to become kings and priests unto God, and women to become queens to their husbands. To be a king, one must have a subject to rule over. His family is the beginning of his kingdom."
So there we are, the kingdom of men, the kingdom of humans, which they believe, all of Mormonism believes in this wholeheartedly. Now, in both the Old Testament and the New Testament, God says that believers, not polygamists, will be made holy and will serve God in his kingdom. Believers are adopted into his family and have the priestly activity of serving God, not their human father or human husband. There is no basis for Mormonism's doctrine that a man will become a god or a king and his wives will be his queens, having their own personal kingdom with their children, worshiping and serving him. That's totally narcissistic. The biblical gospel is totally Christ-centered. The Mormon polygamy gospel is man-centered. Now, just a quick side note here. Most people recognize 666. However, in the Bible, the 666 is a representative number indicating a man-centered kingdom which will be destroyed when Jesus comes back. So Musser and polygamists who think they will have children and harems for eternity are in for an eternal shock. Jesus is exalted, not us. Jesus is King of Kings.
Right.
His is the name above every name, the name at which every living thing will bow. There's no bowing down and worshiping and serving polygamous men in a celestial kingdom. And the biblical mention of a queen in heaven is in the context of idolatry, when the ancient Israelites were bowing down and making cakes to a false female deity, a queen in heaven. We quote from Jeremiah.
Jeremiah 7:18. The children gather wood, the fathers kindle fire, and the women knead dough to make cakes for the queen of heaven. And they pour out drink offerings to other gods to provoke me to anger.
So, worshiping the queen in heaven, or even, paying attention to a so-called queen in heaven, what does he say? It provokes him to anger. I would say we shouldn't do it.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's no small thing to teach and preach and believe in a false heaven, a false gods, false female deities, and a false gospel, all of which God has clearly condemned in the Bible. But Mormonism totally ignores God's warnings, and they plod along, making up their stories and their own beliefs and works to achieve their false salvation. It's so sad, and it's totally terrifying, knowing that their eternity will not be what they thought it would be, and by then, when they realize it, it'll be too late. It is terrifying to think of that. We quote more of Musser's attempts to defend polygamy as being a moral and holy practice.
Polygamy has been classed as one of the twin relics of barbarism, the other twin being slavery. But God's system of polygamy is the antithesis of slavery. The system promotes freedom. It gives every woman an opportunity to marry in accordance with her choice and leaves her free to remain single if she chooses.
Okay, polygamy is slavery. Did you feel like you were a slave when you were a polygamist wife?
Yeah,
You didn't realize...
Well, I didn't really know that I was a second-class citizen. I didn't understand my rights. But when
you left, you started to understand what had gone on.
So I look back and realize I was completely in slavery. But at the time, when you're raised in it, you just think it's normal.
Yeah,
and
right.
You don't.
And what you do, what the negatives you are suffering are for God's glory, for your glory in the eternal kingdoms anyway, so it would be worth it, right?
Well, I never felt like it was worth it. I always told my husband, I feel like this is just a waste of my life.
Yeah.
I felt like my life was wasted in polygamy.
And polygamy is slavery. In fact, in the New Testament talks about Hagar, Abraham's concubine, that she represents slavery.
Look at her.
Yeah. And we've interviewed several women on this show, many women through the years, and they've testified that they were enslaved to polygamy, to the doctrine, to the man, to the other wives, to the religion itself.
That's a good way to put it.
And in fact, they have all said they didn't know what freedom was until they experienced it after they got out of the polygamous system. And I know that's true in my own personal experience. Musser says in this last quote that the polygamy religion gives the woman the choice to remain single. In a polygamy group?
Yeah, I've never heard of anyone getting that choice.
I've never seen it either. Men can remain single because there's not enough females to go around for plural wives, but not the females. He claimed that polygamy is moral because there are millions more females available than there are males.
Another false statement.
And every female has the right to find a husband. And he says a monogamous society doesn't allow for every woman to have a husband, but in polygamy, each woman can be married. I heard that argument many times over.
And isn't it equal male and female that are born in the world?
Born equal.
Pretty equal.
Yeah. Right. In fact, there's a few more males born than females, but more male babies die in infancy than females. And more men go to war than females. So all through it all, God's worked it out to where it's pretty equal. But women live longer, too. So it's a very poor argument for polygamy. What it does is it merely sanctifies a woman lusting after another woman's husband.
Yeah.
And Jesus called that adultery.
Sad.
Musser points out that having children is the purpose of marriage, and polygamy also allows for motherhood for every woman. But that is also a poor argument. It makes the males totally disposable when the few moments of mating is completed, and it too often is the case in polygamous marriages. He gets her pregnant, then ignores her. Many times he does not and cannot supply the needs of his numerous family. Polygamy causes poverty, neglect, and very poor fathering for the children.
Amen.
Musser, like Brigham Young, misapplied a Bible passage using it to support eternal Mormon marriages. We quote from 1 Corinthians 11.
For the man is not of the woman, but the woman of the man. 1 Corinthians 11:11. Nevertheless, neither is the man without the woman, neither the woman without the man in the Lord.
Now, the context of these passages, Brigham Young used it a lot. I don't know if you've heard that much in your group, but Brigham Young used it a lot to prove that plural marriage was the thing to do. But the context isn't polygamy at all.
Right.
It's not eternal marriage or necessity of marriage for a celestial kingdom. The passage is telling us that a man cannot exist without a birth mother, in other words, a woman, and a woman cannot exist without a man to be her father, to father her. Male and female alike exist because of the male and female sexual relationship. That's what it's talking about. That's the context, and that includes the proper respect. By the way, he's talking about the proper respect that the men and the women should have for each other. That's what that whole passage is talking about, not polygamy, certainly not at all. It has nothing to do with Mormon polygamy or celestial marriages. Musser said divorces and separations among Mormon polygamists are extremely rare. Not true.
No.
They call a polygamous divorce a release from their vows. Now, we quote from the time of Brigham Young, very early on in the Mormon polygamy history.
Recent studies have revealed that 1,645 divorces were granted by Brigham Young during the period of his presidency, and that many of these were obtained by prominent pioneer leaders involved in the practice of plural marriage. Despite the lack of documentary evidence that these divorces resulted from polygamy marriages, there are reasons to believe that most, if not all, of these certificates were issued to polygamists. First, many prominent men known to the polygamists are listed on these records of divorce. The names of many general authorities, as well as stake and ward leaders, are included. Second, several cases reveal that 2 or more wives were divorced from one man on the same day.
So he would be a polygamist. And Brigham Young himself was divorced from 10 of his wives. So Musser was lying.
Yeah.
Anyway, the divorces that were granted in this, they said there's no evidence that they were all from plural marriages, but they had to have been from plural marriages because Brigham Young did not have the authority to grant a divorce from a legal marriage.
That's a good point.
So they had to have all been plural marriages. Musser was either ill-informed, uninformed, or he was purposely deceitful. So he concludes that polygamy is not immoral, he says, because it allows a woman to be married despite the shortage of men. It allows a woman to become a mother where otherwise she wouldn't have that opportunity. And supposedly motherhood is the only reason for her existence.
Yeah, and I always thought that polygamy saved me from living a life of prostitution.
Now, a lot of FLDS was big on teaching that. And we're going to get into that, too, in here, because Musser brings that up. Another reason that polygamy is not immoral, according to Musser, is because when a woman is pregnant, she should not be sexually active. So a polygamous man can continue to enjoy sex when a wife is or wives are pregnant. He can just hop into another bed. So it's all about the male and his satisfaction, we quote.
Since when the highest conception of the principle of marriage is adhered to, a pregnant wife is undisturbed sexually by her mate during the entire period of gestation and even lactation. She enjoys normal health, and her offspring will be of higher quality, both mentally and physically.
Well, he's got his science all wrong.
Yeah, we were taught that, and we lived that. And if we varied from it, all you knew you dealt with a lot of guilt and shame, which I think everyone does vary from it.
I'm sure, especially. And there's so much incest, especially in the Kingston group, that when a woman has a deformed or a challenged baby, the guilt is all over the place. It's very sad.
For the woman.
Yeah, but there's no biblical or scientific evidence that normal sexual activity during pregnancy is either wrong or dangerous.
Right.
So Musser, according to another reason in polygamy, is that unmarried women would probably become prostitutes, and this is what you were saying a minute ago. And of course, that's bad logic that Orson Pratt had preached.
Oh, yeah.
And it means that every woman who's not a plural wife would be a prostitute. But they don't think it through, because a woman who's giving her personal sexual and emotional life to a polygamous man, thinking that she's earning her celestial glory, is prostituting herself. She's selling herself at the highest level, exchanging sexual favors for salvation. No wonder so many people leave polygamy and have a bad attitude towards God. They believe that God is the one that started all this nonsense. We quote more of Musser's argument that polygamy is not immoral.
Is polygamy immoral? The polygamy of present-day society may be, and frequently is, grossly so, but Mormon polygamy is not. Rather, it contributes in no small degree to morality. The polygamy of Abraham was neither animal or criminal or immoral.
And then he quotes from section 132 of the Doctrine and Covenants, where Joseph Smith wrongly quoted the Bible that God commanded Sarah to give Abraham another wife, which we've gone through dozens of times on this show. And reading Genesis chapter 16, you discover that's not true at all. God had nothing to do with the mess that Abraham and Sarah got into. In fact, Sarah herself said Abraham did wrong, and the New Testament book in Galatians tells us that Hagar represents slavery, and God wants us to be free. Now, people say God did not condemn Abraham. Well, he and his family suffered the consequences. There's a lot of problems that resulted from his polygamy. Musser claims that David's polygamy was not immoral. He dares say that despite all the sexual crimes that took place in David's polygamous family. Musser said that if marriage itself is not immoral, then polygamy is not immoral. But the word marriage itself does not allow for multiple spouses. At first, the first marriage is described in Genesis and later upheld by Jesus. Marriage is a God-ordained covenant relationship excuse me, between one man and one woman. It was designed to be a sexually exclusive relationship that would bring children into the world. Neither God in the Old Testament or Jesus in the New Testament changed the God-ordained definition or design of marriage. This is what Jesus said. We quote from Matthew.
Matthew 19:4-6. He answered, "Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? And said, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh? So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man or a woman separate."
Or plural marriage separate, because plural marriage does separate that. It makes it different. And so in the ancient past and in the present, men have tried to change it. But God doesn't change, and neither do his decrees change. Musser's next argument for polygamy is chapter 20, entitled "The Ethical Phase of Polygamy, an Economic Viewpoint." And both of us, having been raised in the polygamist economy, we know what a farce that argument is. The economy of it.
Yes, it's so true.
We quote,
"A common objection urged against polygamy in the present day is that the practice is economically unsound, that a man cannot normally care for more than one spouse, that the purpose of Mormon polygamy being primarily to raise children, the burden upon the breadwinner is increased all out of proportion to his ability to provide."
Okay, well, he claims the same argument is true with monogamous marriage. he writes that most women in monogamous marriages are self-supporting.
Really?
In 1944? I don't think so. Now, he might have been thinking about the women who were employed in World War II. I don't know. But most married women, were not self-supporting in those early days of this
Right.
last century.
Yeah.
But he said they were. But that makes it okay. The economic argument cannot apply equally to a monogamous marriage, like he said, because in polygamy the problems are multiplied. The
Yeah.
experiences, the needs, the resources required are multiplied many times over. And that multiplication is still on the head of that one man. One man can reasonably support one wife and children without much difficulty, but can one man support 7 wives and 35 or 40 children?
No, but they have all their women go to work, and that's
They all
why
work.
the children are left unattended to.
Unattended, or they have children raising children, children watching
And
the
we
children.
did that,
That
yeah.
happens a lot, and many of them will get the short end of the stick, while some of his resources will go more to one family or one wife and children
Yeah.
than to the other. So somebody
lived
suffers.
through that, too.
Somebody suffers. We went through it. You went through
It's
it.
heartbreaking.
And most women from polygamy will admit that they also went through it. We know it's economically that it is unethical and unequal. There are never enough resources so that everyone in a polygamous family can have what they need. It is abusive and it is unethical. Now, many of his arguments, Musser lists the many sins of mankind throughout the ages and blaming them on the product of monogamy, and that those sins could easily be reduced by polygamy. But polygamy only produces more problems and solves none. The sins of mankind cannot be placed at the door of monogamy, as he claimed, but can be placed on the fact that all mankind are sinners, beginning with Adam and Eve, who disobeyed God and did their own thing rather than what he commanded. And that's what polygamy does. God designed monogamy. Jesus upheld monogamy. The New Testament affirms monogamy. Mormon polygamy is not the answer to man's sinfulness. Only Jesus is. When we see the poverty and the partiality, the abuse and neglect of Mormon polygamy, we can know that it is not ethical on an economic level. The next chapter, 21, is entitled The Ethical Phase of Polygamy, the Divorce Evil. He quotes the question the disciples asked Jesus about divorce, Matthew 19.
They said to him, "Why then did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce and to send her away?" He said to them, "Because of your hardness of heart, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another, commits adultery." The disciples said to him, "If such is the case of a man with his wife, is it better not to marry?" But he said to them, "Not everyone can receive this saying, but only those to whom it is given."
Now this is directly after Jesus explained monogamy was God's original design for marriage. And so the context is monogamy. Now notice verse 8, God allowed Moses to give divorces because of their hardness of heart. And many Bible scholars agree that that would be the same thing with the hardness of their hearts, that he allowed polygamy. The Bible is clear, and without prevarication, monogamy was and is God's design for marriage. Musser, like other polygamous leaders, maintains that polygamy is the law of heaven. He builds his argument for polygamy on false foundation, and here's one of them.
That in the beginning the male and female were joined together by God, which meant celestial or eternal marriage.
Where does it say that?
I know.
When God brought Adam and Eve together, he brought Eve to Adam. Where does it say that? He misrepresents the Bible. It doesn't say, it says the opposite. Marriage ends at death. It is not eternal. It is not binding eternally. Eternal marriage fabricated totally by Joseph Smith. We have another quote in which he calls monogamy Satan's marriage system.
Today, in Satan's marriage system, Men and women are united in marriage for a time only. Death dissolves the marriage contract. Such a union does not come under the provision in the law, Matthew 9:6, that what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. For in such situations, man, not God, has joined them.
Okay, again, he misinterprets and misapplies the Bible. And they quote the Bible, but they don't believe it's true. Still don't get that. But just like Brigham Young and Orson Pratt and others in the earliest days of Mormonism, they're calling monogamy what God himself ordained as evil, the workings of Satan. Monogamy is not Satan's marriage system. Marriage ends at the death of the spouses and is not Satan's marriage system, as Musser taught it is. There is no eternal marriage. We question, did Jesus lie about that? Did Joseph Smith annul what Jesus taught and then produce his own binding eternal law?
Yes, I think he did.
Read Matthew 22.
But Jesus answered them, "You are wrong, because you know neither the Scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven."
Now, Mormonism teaches that angels aren't married. They believe that. All of Mormonism believe angels are not married. Jesus taught that humans, like the angels, are not married in the hereafter. They aren't married. They don't get married. Well, there's much more in this book that Musser has written about polygamy, God as being God's ideal marriage system, but we're out of time, and perhaps in a later program we can comb through more of his reasoning, trying to prove polygamy is good, righteous, moral, and God's will for us, but it's not God's will for us. Polygamy doesn't make us righteous. Only those who have trusted Jesus alone for eternal life are credited with the perfect righteousness of Jesus, who all by himself is our salvation.
Praise
Don't you
God.
wish you knew that when you were in?
Yes, it just makes
but
me
you
so
found
happy.
out. Praise God, you found out. I was so excited when I finally learned the truth.
know.
Thank you, Karen. We'll
You're
do this
welcome.
again.
Yes, I'm so happy that you're bringing all this to light for people. Thank you, Doris.
And I just hope there's someone out there that they just needed to hear this particular message this time. That's why we do it.
Yes, I hope so.
You know, we are aware that neither the Mormon Church or Mormon polygamy groups trust the biblical record. Their living prophet holds the highest authority, and they believe he speaks to them for God. Many men from Mormonism have arisen and claimed special divine revelation. Men like Harmston and Nemelka and Musser and Snuffer and Jeffs and Kingston and so on. And people go wild after them. Jesus warned us about following anyone other than himself. We don't need a mediator to follow Jesus. We only need him. And to please him, we must believe everything he taught. We must trust him, have saving faith in him and him only. When we begin trusting men or any message that did not originate from the Bible, we have taken a step away from the truth, and that's one step too many. Polygamy is one of those steps. Actually, it's a giant leap. No one needs polygamy or Mormonism or Joseph Smith, the Book of Mormon, or anything else. Jesus is mighty to save, and he wants to save you. So why not just trust him? Thank you for watching.